just said deal with Microsoft. I don't know whether that means you're gonna sort out Microsoft, or you're doing a deal with Microsoft in a kind of Trumpian.
Is that your aspiration for the podcast and where it's going to take us?
What
do you think we'll get
do a trade deal?
Trade.
Well, I'm not going in for any chlorinated chicken. That's for certain.
What are your thoughts about the trade deal and the beef? There's a lot of beef in the trade deal, right?
There's a lot of beef in all trade deals.
I know, but there is literal beef.
Beef
in the US.
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, the notion is that we wouldn't be importing beef that was lower standards in terms of welfare and production methods and things like that. So in that respect, I don't think I have a major concern, but I have concerns about the wider beef industry in North America and some of the practices.
So you do have beef?
I have beef, but not necessarily with the beef that might come to these shores as a consequence of the trade deal.
Well, that is as good a place as any to start this episode of Absolute Units. I'm Joe Vaughan, the museum's social media manager.
And I'm Ollie Douglas, the curator at the museum.
We've just finished our first 4 pilot episodes of the podcast. Yeah, it's been a blast, hasn't it?
Yeah, it was great fun recording them and really interesting conversations. And I think if nothing else, it just reminds me how amazingly interconnected the world is and the way in which we can just use these collections to talk about myriad different subjects.
Yeah, I mean, we were saying just before we started recording and just before we started talking about trade deals and beef, that it is striking how much you can connect and can link back to the collections we have. And I think that the first 4 podcasts just testified to that.
Yeah. So that first episode with Adam Kazari, I guess that makes a kind of transatlantic connection, a bit like the beef, doesn't it? That big uplift in social media.
Microsoft as well.
But yeah. Microsoft. What are we talking about Microsoft?
You mentioned Microsoft at the start, didn't you?
I mentioned it before we were talking and recording, I think.
I think we may have been recording.
Ah,
Anyways,
okay.
Do Adam Kazari again.
Can't even remember what I was saying about Adam.
You were saying something really insightful about Adam.
Well, no, it's what Adam's work and the social media connection and the Absolute Unit and all of that success. It's what made the Merle gain a name in North America, I guess, and gain a following from a whole series of people who hopefully will come visit at some point. Many of them have, but many of them still haven't darkened our door yet, and they're very welcome. But
our fellow Americans.
Yeah, exactly.
But I also, I mean, we were saying that one of the great things we hope with the podcast and with all of the digital content we do is that we're reaching people around the world, and people who may never come to the museum or be able to come to the museum can at least experience what we have going on here through the digital content.
Yeah, and it works the other way around as well, I guess. The conversation that we had with Shweta Ghosh about India and about tea and about spices just shows, again, how these collections have those links to other parts of the world, that they connect to really grounded contextual stories and histories about people's lives elsewhere. So it's not just about rural England. So there's the Scottish half of me that's quite pleased about that. The English half isn't that bothered. It's like, what
I'm half Welsh.
Oh, well, there you go. I had no idea. So how's the Welsh half of you feeling about that?
Yeah, fine. I'm half Welsh enough to not have that stronger feelings about it, but it is definitely nice that we are just able to cover so much ground, and for kind of peeling back the curtain of Absolute Units, we're currently planning the next crop of episodes, and we have some really interesting conversations coming up. But yeah, we thought we'd record an episode just because we've done something every 2 weeks for the last 8 weeks. So why not make it 10 weeks and share something else just about where we're at and what we have coming up?
Are we going to talk about what we've got coming up then? Is that the plan?
I think we can talk about it right now.
Okay.
But first, Ollie, do you want to mention the terrific Kai Shrubstall visit from last week?
Yeah. So we do these gallery tours, and in some ways the gallery tours were the inspiration for the podcast, because it was sort of seeing and listening to one of these gallery tours that gave rise to conversations about maybe we should record these So this week just gone, we had Guy Shrubsole, the writer and activist and campaigner. Guy's written a couple of books, the wonderful Lost Rainforests of Britain, Who Owns England, and his latest book, The Lie of the Land, is a really deep dive into some of those issues of connectivity with landscapes and rural places, commoners' rights, all of the histories of enclosure and things that underpin those. And it takes you to some really interesting places. So we wandered around the galleries with Guy and had conversations about aspects of our collections that possibly cross over. So I won't go into too much detail because hopefully we will get Guy back at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're listening to this, Guy, we would love to have you on the podcast.
Yeah,
we will find a more direct way of reaching you.
We forgot to have that conversation because Guy, immediately after actually the gallery tour ran long, and he had lots of conversations with people afterwards and wanted to have his photograph taken with a map that we've acquired into the collections, which is a sort of limited edition map that's based on his research into who owns Dartmoor. Immediately after that, he had to rush off to go and look at archives in the reading room here at the museum.
He put a photo of the map on Blue Sky. So we'll link to that in the show notes because it is a very impressive map.
Yeah, and I posted a photo of that map. Actually, I reposted that photo and a link to the database record for that map on Blue Sky only this morning because it's directly relevant to something that's happening today. We're recording this on the day that the Supreme Court were making a final decision about an appeal to do with wild camping on Dartmoor, and I'm very pleased to say that they've agreed that wild camping can and should continue on Dartmoor moving forward. So that's a great win for Guy and for that wider Right to Roam conversation.
For any listeners who are unfamiliar, would you explain Right to Roam very quickly? Because it will come up again in future podcasts, I'm sure, because we're planning on speaking to a few people about these kinds of topics. Yeah, so
Right to Roam is the name given to a campaign to do literally that. It provide that right to walk freely in parts of rural England. So for those of you who don't know, in Scotland there is a sort of provisional right to roam in lots of places. So you can go out and wander in landscapes relatively freely, provided that you're not leaving litter and causing harm and damage. You don't have that right in England, so there are very restricted places and spaces within which you can walk. This is unfamiliar to me because I grew up north of the border, so it's a little bit strange to me. So I have a natural inclination to trespass, but not everyone necessarily feels as comfortable as I do wandering into rural spaces. So the Right to Roam campaign, co-founded by Guy and a number of other activists and campaigners a couple of years ago, revisits a whole series of conversations about rural rights of access that have been rumbling on for years. So the famous touchstones in this history are the mass trespass of Kinder Scout in the 1930s, although it was wasn't the biggest mass trespass. And then we have, movements like the Open Spaces Society, whose archives we hold here at the museum. So the Open Spaces Society is the UK's longest running organisation campaigning for those kinds of rights. It's been running since the 1860s, and we hold a lot of those archives. So we can tell that story really powerfully in terms of the history, but the Right to Roam campaign and those conversations continue, as is evidenced by today's court case and the conversations that are ongoing.
In fact, we had a conversation with academic Katrina Navikas just last week about a podcast we want to do about the work of the Open Spaces Society and similar work. So, yeah, we'll be very excited to delve back into that then.
Yeah, and hopefully she'll also talk about bins. You got very excited about bins. Joe got insanely excited about bins. It's yeah.
Well, it's because Katrina did some work with Joe Lycett on a project about bins.
So Katrina has a book coming out later this year all about the contested commons and some of those bits of work connected to her own Merle Fellowship. So we host research fellowships here at the museum, and she did one connected to the Open Spaces Society collections, which was very cool.
The online map that she made of placing photos from the Open Spaces archive in a kind of geographical map of the UK. It's very cool. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Yeah,
so we're going to get Katrina in to talk about that and about bins. At some point, hopefully, we'll persuade Guy to come back and talk about his work. It's not just people who make maps who have been involved in making maps. We're going to talk to other people as well. So we had a really good conversation earlier today with our old colleague, Tim Jerome, who has worked here in the reading room, providing access to those collections. He also worked sort of curatorially with me on a number of projects, and he's gone off to do a PhD. So that's going to be a really exciting conversation.
Yeah. He's researching into queer rural lives. So the lives and histories of queer people living in the countryside. And it's fantastic work. So yeah, lots more to come.
Yeah, and I guess for those of you who maybe have joined us originally because you're interested in absolute units and giant animals, Joe obviously has been posting hog. I think that's what you call it. Is that right? That sounds really awful.
That is the technical term for it. That is the technical term.
You've been posting hog.
Posting hog.
And the posting of hog has attracted enthusiasm from one of the leading environmental historians in the world, Dolly Jurgensen, and she's going to join us to talk about hog, basically.
Yeah,
we're going to talk hog.
We hope we're going to have 2 episodes about hogs. So
yeah,
at least. And that's just in the near future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This could expand, exponentially like the hog.
Much like the hog did. Yeah.
And it's taking me out of my comfort zone, I guess, because, I can talk about cows and about sheep with the familiarity of someone who's worked on farms with cows and sheep and someone who has dairying and sheep farming heritage. But yeah, my knowledge of pigs is minimal, to say the least. So I'm on a steep learning curve.
I sort of feel like this entire podcast is taking us and our collections beyond our comfort zone. We're exploring a new medium and we're exploring lots of different ways into the collection by having these really interesting chats with all kinds of people who we may never, those doors may never have seemed open even a few months ago. So yeah, exciting times.
This feels like a sort of podcast equivalent of the curatorial experience now. Old school curatorship. You sat in a room, you decided on the story yourself, you wrote a few labels, you bunged them out there. You hoped beyond hope that someone might at least read one of them. And now curatorship is all about collaboration and participation and conversations with other people and trying to share their stories and perspectives. And I think that's exactly what we're doing with the podcast. And it kind of reflects loads of really cool conversations that are happening day in, day out in different corners of this building in connection with these amazing collections.
Do you think there's any overlap between museum labels and social media captions?
They're quite hard to write in a successful way.
In 280 characters.
Yeah. Well, it is phenomenally difficult to write a successful piece of museum text. And I speak as someone who's written museum texts that have been pulled to pieces subsequently by, people looking at and critiquing museum text. And it's not necessary.
The same.
Yeah. And
doing social media. So another piece of context is that the initial pilot project was Ollie with our colleague Katie Bergen, who has since left the museum. So before, I was in the background as the producer, as well as social media person, marketing manager. Museum workers wear a lot of hats. But yeah, moving forward, I'm going to be co-hosting with Ollie. And Ollie pointed out that I'm probably due an introduction of myself as well. So I joined the Merlin in 2019 as the social media person and then stayed for, basically I was here for 6 months and then it was COVID, which was like social media management on the hardest mode possible because suddenly everything had to go through social media or digital. And then, I stayed here till 2023. Then I left for a year and then I came back in my old manager's job. And social media, hogs.
Yeah. I'm thinking back to that period of the pandemic. That was we both worked probably more intensively than either of us have ever worked before. It was amazingly hard work just because of the quantity of digital outputs. And I remember a peaceful moment in my back garden having a socially distanced coffee with you, Joe. When
we had a very nice chat, didn't we?
Yeah.
Came to Oxford a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was. I mean, I think that the pandemic was, we already had reached success on social media. So I joined just after the Absolute Unit post, which was done obviously by Adam, who's probably my closest friend in Reading, and I see him all the time.
I don't live in Reading, by the way, just in case you think Joe hates me, but He doesn't hang out with me.
No, you're my closest friend in Oxford.
He had a coffee with me once in Oxford.
You're my closest friend in Oxford. I have closest friends in every city. I feel like a dandy.
Yeah. Well, that's very cool. Well, I'm very privileged to know that I'm your closest friend.
You
in
are
Oxford.
my closest friend in Oxford. You're my closest friend in this room as well.
Well, it's just the two of us in this room, but I'll take the compliment.
Yeah. But yeah, the pandemic was suddenly digital was so crucial to all museum engagement. It was the only way we got anything out at all. So it placed an enormous amount of responsibility. It's also worth pointing out we have a one-person digital team. We are not a big outfit at all, but we have big dreams. So no, it's really interesting, and if anything, the pandemic validated the hope and joy we find in digital content and reaching people on the internet.
And just circling back to that question about the similarities between posting on social media platforms and writing museum text, this feels like a sort of long and rambling and unstructured conversation, completely lacking in coherence and not carefully bounded by a word limit. So I hope you'll forgive us that, but it's been quite a nice conversation.
Yeah. I guess our reason for recording it was firstly to assure you that we have episodes in the works. We should be back with regular programming between mid to late June. At least that's what we're working to at the moment. So watch this space or listen to this space, I suppose. And yeah, in the meantime, we have exciting things happening online and in person. Ollie, do you want to touch on some of the cool things we have coming up in the next few months at the museum?
Yeah, so at the moment we've still got on display a series of photographs connected to the photographer and farmer Amy Bateman's project 40 Farms. We lack space in the museum, so we've whittled it down. It's sort of 20 or so farms for us, but it's still called 40 Farms. Just we're luring you in with the big numbers and then hitting you with the limited
2 farms.
Yeah. You get
50%
of the farms, and all 40 are in her book. So
it's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to get Amy on the podcast at some point as well.
Yeah, so she'll be in the museum for an in-person event as well. I think that's coming up. We've also got a couple of gallery tours coming up before we break for the summer. So we've got Tom Macmillan from the Royal Agricultural University, and he's interested in, what does he do? He does...
He's going to talk about the Soil Association?
Yeah, so he had connections to the Soil Association. He does work with farm innovation. He's a really interesting guy, and his title, he's an Elizabeth Creek professor of agriculture. Elizabeth Creek has connections historically to the museum in a sort of tangential way, so we'll touch on that too. And then we've also got the PhD researcher Becky Lyons, who is looking at tactile engagement with nature and how that experience of getting hands-on can enhance your understanding and connectivity to the natural world. So we'll be hopefully doing some handling of museum objects and thinking about how tactile engagement can be part of that relationship that we have with nature-adjacent things, I guess our collections constitute, rather than the natural world itself. Nature-adjacent.
Nature-adjacent.
We've also got the Romany Traveller Heritage Day coming up on the 14th of June.
Yes.
So that's a day when we'll be talking about and celebrating some of the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities and their histories that we can explore through the collections, but also welcoming representatives of those communities to come and share with us a really fun day at the museum.
For kids, there'll be things like blacksmithing in the museum garden. We're also going to be joined by our fellow Dr. Joe Clement, who's an award-winning poet and lecturer at Northumbria University. And Joe's been doing some amazing work with us, recurating one of our spaces to do more to represent the histories of Gypsy, Roma and Traveller peoples. So the official opening of that display will be on the Romanian Traveller Heritage Day. And that's free to join. So yeah, more information on our website, but that's free to join, no need to book. You can drop in throughout the day.
And while she's down for that event, we should speak to Joe about doing a podcast.
We will speak to Joe about doing a podcast.
We will.
Yeah, we will.
Let's do that.
Worth pointing out, the event with Amy Bateman is an evening event on July the 9th. So it'll be 6:30 to 9 p.m. going behind the scenes of 40 Farms and the exhibition. Tickets are £15, and the booking link should be up within the next couple of weeks at the very latest. And we'll do a post on social media when that's live. And the gallery tours are, well, the next one is June the 10th, and that's 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. So yeah, I think that's probably a good place to wrap. Do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. And if you'd like to support the pod, we have lots of beautiful, even exquisite merch in our online shop. Not memorabilia. We had a conversation earlier. We do not sell museum memorabilia. We do not sell artifacts online. And yeah, if you're enjoying, please leave us a review and subscribe. It means the world to us. And if you're interested in supporting the pod, we have a donations link in the show notes as well. Thank you very much.
Do you want me to say thank you?
Go on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. See you later.